All right, what's up, Animal Allies? We are live. You're live with Animal Activism Collective. We have a great live stream planned for you again tonight. So fortunate we are. So what's up as folks join us, please say hey and shout out any grassroots activism groups in the comments and tell us how to find you and report any victories because that's the fuel we need. Yeah. So, two recent victories worth mentioning. Pressure campaigning got Ahold Delhaize, the grocery conglomerate, to commit to a cage free policy. And at the same time, the Emmys have gone for free. Woo! After dialogue with CAFT, Television Academy has announced that all Television Academy Emmy ceremonies this year, including the Creative Arts Emmy Awards and the Primetime Emmy Awards telecast, will be for free. Woohoo! Let's hear it for that. Activism works, my friends. So, welcome to another educational live stream tonight. Pro Animal Future's Natalie Fulton and Anvar Ruziev will be talking about securing TV and radio attention for pro animal campaigns by communicating a compelling message to the media. Before we begin, for those who are new to AAC, Animal Activism Collective is a support system and a resource designed to empower grassroots activism. AAC was created to equip activists with the tools, community, and resources they need to boldly participate in our global animal liberation movement. AAC offers a free 3-month mentorship program, which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. A podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour. We host free educational live streams and online training like this. And we organize large-scale in-person collaborative events internationally. In fact, the AAC London Convergence is April 3rd through 12th, coming up fast. Housing is filling up, folks, so especially those in Europe, we are encouraging you to register ASAP. Also, mark your calendar, join our Grassroots Animal Rights Summit in Washington, D.C., from May 15th through 17th, 2026, for 3 powerful days of learning, connection, community, and action. Also, we have a new pressure campaign training course led by the experts. Learn to organize your own successful campaigns. There is an application to submit. We'll put the link tree in the comments with all the info. And for our full 2026 schedule of convergences, please check our social media and website. If you've attended any convergences with us, let us know in the comments. And what was that like for you? All right, now on to our program. Pro Animal Future is a citizen-led movement away from the exploitation, animal cruelty, and environmental pollution of factory farming, and towards a brighter future based on a more just, sustainable, and compassionate food system. Natalie is Pro Animal Future's media and content lead. She creates videos to change society from viewing animals as objects. Anvar is currently the press and public relations lead for Pro Animal Future. His focus is on acquiring press coverage for animal-related events. And we will take your questions after the presentation, but hold them for now. Okay, so Anvar, if you're ready, yes, I'll pass it over to you. You can go ahead and share your screen, get started.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Michelle. I appreciate it. And that course definitely sounds interesting. You've got my attention with that. So what I'm going to be sharing today is the behind the scenes of news and what's going on inside of your local news station. So some of the topics that I want to cover are the different types of news markets, the hierarchy of the station, journalist types, the different types of stories that journalists cover, the story approval process, and how to find different news angles for your pitches. So this here is the former station where I used to work in Southwest Florida. And where I want you to take away from this presentation is who are you going to contact in the newsroom? When are you going to send out your press releases? and how do you get your story approved? So let's find out. And before we start, a little bit of ethos for myself to establish who I am. So my name is Anvar Ruziev, and I started out as a photojournalist in Southwest Florida, and then I got promoted to be a multimedia journalist. I've published nearly 500 articles, and I consistently produce the top performing packages based on metrics of viewership, engagement, those sort of things. I have about 3 years of TV news experience in a market that's ranked 53rd by size in the United States. Before that, I operated a videography business with clients such as FEMA, hospitals, and different types of marketers. And I went to school in Denver for economics and Spanish. So, here you can see it's the 53rd ranked market that I worked for. And to give you a little bit of more of an explanation of what markets are. So here we're looking at this very colorful map of the United States. And currently there are about 210 different TV news markets in the United States. So what does this mean? This little tiny blue one here in Southwest Florida is the one where I worked. So when you turn on your TV, you turn on your local Fox affiliate, NBC affiliate, NBC, you're going to get a certain type of programming. It's different than if you were to turn it on in Miami. So in Miami, it's going to be different ownership. It's going to be different journalists. It's going to be different anchors and different stations. So here in Denver, we have all this green area in Colorado. That's going to be one market. But if you go down to Colorado Springs, that's going to be an entirely different market. So this is important to know based on your location, how far of a reach you're expecting when you pitch your story to the media, and how many different, especially here in the the Atlantic Northeast, how many small markets there are. So it might be a good idea to pitch to more than just your local station. So even though there's so many different stations, the vast majority of them are actually owned by just 10 corporations. And a lot of these are consolidating into duopolies as well with new FCC guidelines. So keep that in mind. And the name of the channel does not necessarily reflect the values or the bias of said station. So having worked for a local Fox affiliate, I constantly had to explain to people like, hey, we're not actually associated with the national Fox News. You know, they would always wave their arm at me and say, oh, there goes Fox News. And I'm like, hey, we're actually different. So the affiliate, the corporation that I worked for was actually called EW Scripps. So this is more of like a middle of the ground, not necessarily blue leaning, not necessarily red leaning, just kind of middle of the ground corporation, as opposed to, you know, Fox television stations, which obviously are going to be a little bit more red leaning. So why is this important to know? Because the same structures are across the corporation. So you see these 231 stations for Nexstar Media, they're all going to be using the same scripts, they're all going to be using the same packages, they're all going to be using the same media, and they have the same website styles. So this is helpful when you're trying to find journalists and you can't seem to find their email. They usually have the same email structure, things of that nature. And a good thing to note as well is that the only affiliation that, for example, like your local Fox affiliate has to Fox News is that they can use the same media that Fox has. So there's a big database and they can access that Fox database for the video files, but that's pretty much where their connection ends. So moving on, we have the station hierarchy. So inside of these stations, it's kind of separated into two sides. There's the sales side, and then there's the news side. So we're going to be looking primarily at the news side, and in charge of all the news decision making is the news director. That's pretty much who everyone answers to in the newsroom. That's who has the final say behind everything. And then right underneath the news director, you have the assistant news director. And these are going to be people that approve scripts, approve story pitches, and things like that. So these are pretty important contacts to know. You know, if you browse through LinkedIn, they're often listed on there. And this is who the reporters, the photojournalists, anchors, and pretty much everybody else in the newsroom reports to. But there's also other people in the newsroom. So there's the executive producer who also writes scripts and who also produces content, but they're just not necessarily the on-camera talent. And the regular producers and editors answer to them. And there's also directors, but these are not to be confused with news directors. So these directors are just in charge of pressing buttons to get different news angles, to get different angles of cameras, and to sort of help the show run on time. So this is a different kind of director. So another aspect of the newsroom that people might often overlook is the digital team as well. With the digital team, these are the guys that sit and listen to the radio scanner inside the newsroom. And they are the ones that put together short articles that aren't necessarily reporter, um, that don't necessarily warrant a reporter going out and collecting data. So if you send out a press release, oftentimes the digital team will pick it up, or if you call the station, the digital team will answer, and the assignment manager is in charge of the digital team, and they're the ones who actually pitch the stories during meetings. So, um, stories are sourced from the community, but the assignment manager is somebody who you definitely want to have on your mailing list. So speaking of journalists, there's different journalist types. So first is the reporter, which everyone or a lot of people I assume are familiar with. And this is basically just a reporter who's on camera and they have a photographer following them around, right? So the photographer and the journalist, they collect stories, they report on stories, and this is your typical um, relationship here. But news stations are consolidating, a lot of staff is getting laid off, and news stations are opting in for more multimedia journalists. So here you can see that my photographer was replaced by a drone, basically. So what multimedia journalists are basically just a one-man band where they write the articles, they edit the footage, they source a lot of their own stories, they record everything, they get the interviews, and they're the on-camera talent as well. And then, of course, there's the photojournalists, which are pretty self explanatory. They're just behind the camera, but don't necessarily discount these guys and gals because they are usually the most seasoned ones out in the field. These guys that I've worked with have been around for 15 years, some of them for 20 years. And how they view your connection and how they view your story often reflects a lot in the work that they put out as well. So they communicate a lot with the reporters writing the scripts. So don't discount. I know a lot of them are grumpy in the corner with the camera, but it's definitely worth chatting with them. And sometimes they put together stories themselves without journalists, and I'll talk a little bit about that here. There's the different story types that journalists put together, and this is a lot of information, and this took me a while to learn all the acronyms and things, but this is kind of useful because with today's, AI technology and things like that, if you're producing content, you can use these acronyms to help you write really good scripts. So if you want like a full news package script, usually what that is that's a standard story that ranges between a minute and 45 seconds to 3 minutes. So this is just your standard story that you see on TV, and it usually consists of 3 sound bites that the journalist gets. Um, there's going to be about 2 characters. 2 of them are going to be having an opinion, usually like the opposing sides of a story. And then there's going to be 1 expert who kind of gives the details and gives the facts, somebody who is credentialed. And these usually have an on-camera intro and outro like, hey, I'm Anvar Ruziev here in Denver reporting on X, Y, and Z. Then you also have what's called a look live VOSOT, or if you're going to say it all out, it's a look live voiceover sound on tape. And that's a mouthful, but those are shorter stories. So those only go for about a minute and 30 seconds on average. And they usually just have 1 soundbite. So this is sometimes stories that aren't as the news director deems aren't as important, or the executive producer putting together the show. They're like, hey, these stories don't need a whole entire package. This can just be a look live VOSOT. And the look live just means that it has an on-camera intro and outro. So then we also have the voiceover sound on tape. When people are sending out press releases, oftentimes the really good marketers and PR relations personnel, they send out VOSOTs. So they'll send out like a minute of B-roll video, and at the end of the video, they'll have 1 to 3 sound bites that they've recorded themselves. And this just makes the journalists' lives a lot easier. They know what they're getting into. And it also is referred to as an anchor read. So this is something that the anchors can just read on air without necessarily having a reporter or a full-blown story. The anchor can just tell the story themselves based on the information that they have from the press release. And then one of the last things is a Nat pack. These aren't very common, but this is what I was referring to when I said the photographers can put this together. So this basically has no reporter talking. It's just a photojournalist that goes out and gets interviews. And then the whole story is basically put together by sound bites. So it's usually the person that the story is about kind of telling the whole story throughout, and then it'll have an anchor to introduce it. And then voiceover, you can just think of this as video. And this is oftentimes also for anchor reads. An anchor can just read over video. And when reporters refer to video instead of video, they often call it just VO. So yeah, that's a lot of information, but yeah, it's very useful when you're trying to put together scripts. You know, you can ask whatever your preferential AI choice is. If you use it, like, hey, put together a look like VOSOT or put together a package, and it'll give you a much more professional script in my experience. So then we have story approval. So you have your story and you want to pitch it to the station, right? So when is a good time to pitch it? Well, our station, we had 3 different meetings. We had 3 different shows. We had the morning show, the morning live show, which started at about 5 a.m., went until about 9 p.m. And then we have the PM show, like the afternoon show. So this is 5 and 6 p.m. This is when everyone's getting home from work, everyone's getting home from school, and this is the majority of where the stories are going to be put together and when they're going to be told. And then we have the night side reporters, and this is the evening show that usually starts at 10 p.m. or at like to 11 p.m. So the night side reporters. And before going out on their shifts, we had all of our reporters convene and have a meeting. So the first meeting is at about 4 to 5 a.m. And that's when they decide who is going out on what story. So producers show up as early as 2 a.m. sometimes. So when sending out a press release, consider that, you know, if you send something out at about 3 a.m., there's might be a producer who's, you know, looking for some content that wants to add to their runtime. And they might pick up your story and then, you know, they'll pass it along in the meeting and then they'll pass it along to the next meeting. So oftentimes, you know, getting it into the morning show is usually the best. But yeah, if you send it out in the afternoon, usually there's less reporters working night side, but it's still possible. And then I just have the times of when their deadlines usually are. And then for the morning show, a lot of, if you have like something fun going on, if it's like involving a sanctuary, there's a lot of action. They prioritize live fun shots to kind of get people happy and excited for the day, sort of thing. But yeah, and then who do you pitch your story to? So I want you to know that anyone at the station can pitch the story. I've even had stories pitched by the sales department. They show up to me and they're like, hey, I have this neighbor who has a squatter sitting on their property. Do you think you could come out and, you know, cover this as a potential story? And I was like, yeah, sure. You know, why not? And then, you know, because I know them, I'm much more likely to, you know, follow through with that story. And, the news director is much more likely to approve it because, you know, if our sales department or an employee is coming with a story, then it probably means a lot more to them. So pretty much anyone in the newsroom can pitch it, but your primary targets to pitch it to should be reporters, the multimedia journalists, the assignment desk, the digital team, the producers, and the anchors. So those are the people that are involved in the meetings themselves. And their emails, their contact information is often listed on the website. So here I have an example of my information listed. So there's a small personal blurb about me liking to play tennis and which beach I like to go to, and my email, along with all of my social contact information. Um, but as far as the other people go, so like the assignment desk isn't usually going to have a section like this on the website. So for them, it's a good idea to go to LinkedIn and get their name or get their email. And then you can use the same format as the email for the journalists. And so first name, period, period, last name at the website. And then that's going to be the same across the corporation, basically across all markets that that corporation is in. So that's a way to get contact information of the assignment desk and other people that may not be as easily findable on the website. And of course, most stations do have a generic tip email that you can just send out your press release to. That should always be the first place you send it to, because that's what's actually optimized for it. Um, and then you can even call the news station, and typically the assignment desk are the people that answer. So if you have something breaking, or if you feel like you have a better chance of pitching it in like through the phone, um, oftentimes, yeah, like we always answered the phone at our station and had conversations with people. Um, so then how to get approved, there's different types of stories. So I know there's a very intense fire here, but no worries, there were no injuries. This was a restaurant that burned down after hours. And this was some footage that I went to go get during that fire. And this is an example of breaking news. So breaking news will always take priority over any other news that are reported. So there was a time when I was in the middle of an interview with someone, and then my news director had texted me like, "Hey, give me a call immediately." So I call them, and they're like, "A plane just fell out of the sky. You need to go." And I was like, oh, "Okay." So I'm like, "I'm sorry, guys. I'd love to put the story together with you guys, but I have to go. There's breaking news." So if there's breaking news and something really intense is happening, chances are, um, you know, that's going to be the primary focus. That's what gets more revenue for the stations. That's what they're there for, is information during these kinds of situations. So then the next type of story is an enterprise story. And this is what journalists typically try to do, which are stories sourced from the community. So they kind of explain why journalism is necessary in your community. And these are the kinds of stories that you should be trying to pitch when it comes to sending press releases to journalists. So if you have studies, if you have like some sort of happenings, if there's like trends, uh, those kinds of things are usually picked up a lot more, rather than what are called feature stories, which is basically just like a feel good character story. So I'll give you an example for an animal sanctuary, for example, right? Like, oh, they surpassed like 50 animals at an animal sanctuary. That would be a feature story. So that's like a feel good story. There's compelling characters, there's animals, it's fun visually. But, um, for example, like Sanctuary is closing down due to budget problems. That would be more of an enterprise story. That would be much more likely to get picked up because that is considered, that is considered like more true journalism, whereas feature stories aren't taken as seriously in the newsroom. And then, of course, there's investigative stories, which is like exposing scams and so on, which are also very important. So then there's some obstacles, right? When you're pitching your story, there's some things that the news directors look for. And what they look for is newsworthiness. And it's a pretty subjective term, but basically, to sum it all up, the news directors want to impact the largest amount of people with their story. So the more people your story impacts, the more chance there is of it getting picked up. The second runner-up would be controversial stories that drive engagement, and this is where I think animal activism really thrives. Is Animal activism stories, from what I've noticed, are very controversial, and they, get a lot of comments. They get a lot of engagement on social media, and that's how you can sort of measure the metric of whether the stories will be worth it for this news stations to put out. You also want to make sure that the story that you're putting out is balanced. So if it's very one-sided, you're not going to be able to get uh, well, there's a possibility you might still be able to get a news director to approve it. But in my experience, when there were protests happening against the president, and it was a huge deal, like so many people were wanting to come out and protest against the president, and I pitched that as a story, and my news director told me no. I'm like, I know this is going to get a lot of views, I know it's going to get a lot of engagement, but my news director was like, no, we're not going to cover that because it would be too one-sided. It would be just, the protesters. There's not like an opposing force that we can balance out the story with. So it's very important. So to give you an example, we're currently working on foie gras prohibitions at Pro Animal Future. So if we were to if I was a journalist trying to put together a story on foie gras prohibition, I would want to interview one activist that's part of the movement. I would want to interview one restaurant serving foie gras to balance it out. And then I would want an expert opinion, like an economics professor. Like, how is this actually going to affect restaurants, right? And somebody that has credentials that's going to be able to give more information that's verifiable. So as far as other elements that you want your story to have is lots of action. If there's lots of people, lots of action, and we had a running joke in our newsroom that usually when people tell you like, oh, 100 people are going to be showing up, it's usually half of that. So oftentimes people over exaggerate the numbers, or they say that so and so many people are going to be showing up, and then it's a lot less when you actually go to the event. So the journalists are aware of that, and they do keep that in mind. But the more people there are, the more likely it is to get picked up. And then you have to consider who's watching the news regularly, right? Like when there's breaking news, a lot of people are watching, of all kinds of demographics. But it's when it's just your standard run-of-the-mill everyday stories, it's typically the older generations that are watching, as far as based on Nielsen ratings and the demographics. So that's kind of who pays the bills at the news station, right? They're the ones watching the ads. They're the ones who tune in regularly, and they're the ones that news companies often pander to. And then this one is kind of upsetting, but fear-driven stories are prioritized. So this one is, I remember one of my superiors at the station, I pitched a story to them, and they were like, oh no, we need something that like creates more fear. And I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? So this is this unfortunately is the truth of the matter, that fear-driven stories do get like more engagement. So I'll go into this a little bit more in the next slides. And then there's also political stories, but political stories are very risky. So I have an example here on the left-hand side. This was one of my favorite stories that I've ever done, I think. But basically, this was when Florida deputies across the state got rights similar to immigration agents. So this was a very controversial story. So I showed up and I asked about racial profiling, and this was a room filled with over 20 sheriffs. So it was like really intense. And for those of you that don't know, sheriffs are basically the highest end of law enforcement for a county. And this was, 20, over 20 of them gathered in one room. And I'm just standing there, my knees are shaking. And I was like, okay, how are you guys gonna address racial profiling? And they started yelling at me. They're like, we don't racially profile, la, 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 la. And I was like, whoa, okay. But they do have like racial profile training that they had to do. But anyway, that story was very difficult to do. That got a lot of views, a lot of engagement. But here, one of the comments even, Anvar, you show your blue, right? So that really jeopardizes my my journalistic integrity, because now people are going to assume I'm, biased towards like a liberal agenda, which is not something that journalists want at all. They want to come off as non-biased as possible. So that's why doing political stories It's only going to be very, very seasoned journalists that really know what they're doing. Otherwise, it's just not worth it to do those kinds of stories. Um, so then when it comes to animal stories, right? That's what we're here for. We want to get animal stories approved. And I'll be honest, right off the bat, it is very difficult to get animal-based stories approved. They are not taking seriously in the journalistic world, or at least at the station where I worked. People, me personally, even as a journalist, it's like, oh, you're doing a story about an animal shelter. That's fun. You get to hang out with puppies all day, like that sort of thing. So I do admit that I was a little bit. I personally didn't take animal stories as seriously as well until I got more into the animal rights movement. But I was able to, once I was a little part, a bigger part of the animal rights movement, once I began kind of changing my own behaviors, that's when I started trying to pitch more animal related stories. Um, and this is what helped me get that. So, original visual elements. This is something that you have yourself filmed, or something that the journalist can go out and film. So, this lady here that I interviewed, she was very nice. She does dolphin protection. She started her own nonprofit. She was a vegan as well, which I found out, which was really cool. But she got so close to the dolphins and she had like amazing video of it. So that kind of helped a lot. And wild animals are prioritized as well over factory farmed animals. So countless stories I've done with bears running around the streets, but when it comes to factory farmed animals or animals on a farm, it's very, very difficult to get journalists to report on something like that. Which, yeah, leads me into the next bullet here, that animal abuse stories are picked up regularly. Very often, people get really upset about um, harm being done to dogs and cats, which, I'm sure we're all aware of. But unfortunately, that same courtesy isn't extended to animals on factory farms. Um, but there is another thing that helps these kinds of stories get picked up, is the risk to humans. So for example, this story with the eagles, I was able to get that approved due to uh, pathogen factor, right? So it's kind of ties back into that fear-based reporting, like, hey guys, bird flu, right? Bird flu is so scary. And it is scary, and that's why, my news director approved it. He was like, "Oh yeah, there's bald eagles getting bird flu, like, that's concerning, and people should be aware of that because that directly impacts people." So, if you can tie your story into some way directly impacting people as well, primarily even if it's based through, like, a fear of bird flu or a pathogen similar to that, that significantly improves the chances of it getting picked up. And then, of course, you're going to be providing some information to the journalist. So, what kind of information is very important, because I can't tell you the amount of times I've stood there and interviewed someone, and then this Big Lebowski meme just came into my head where people are just like sharing their opinions and they're going on and on about stuff. And I'm like, I can't really use any of this information at all. I mean, it's good to have for background information, but it's not anything that I can report on because it's not anything that I can verify. So when you're putting out your press release, when you're pitching your stories, you want to make sure that you have a credible source. And those are going to be agendas from the government, like town council meetings, local planning agencies, things like that, of that nature. Excuse me. Police reports, often, you can get police reports for free in some places. If there's some kind of investigation, animal cruelty investigation on a farm, a police report will go so far for you. University studies are a great source of credibility. Municipal documents, so such as violations, permits, and things like that. That's all public record that people can access through their local municipality. Untampered video footage. So when you're providing some sort of video footage, you want to make sure that it's as raw and as close to reality as possible. So don't try to edit it for them. Maybe, just put it all together to make it convenient, but don't try to edit any of the footage, would be my recommendation. And first hand testimony. So if you were actually there and this happened right in front of you, that's valuable to journalists. That's always who or that's always who I was looking for, at least, is somebody that is there who can give a witness recount. Um, somebody that can say that this happened right in front of me. So the opposite end of that is information that can't be verified is not going to air. A lot of what happens is he said, she said, they said, someone told me this. From this source, I heard this. That's, I think monkey telephone is the term, I think. But yeah, basically it goes down the chain and you can't really verify any of that, right? The journalists aren't going to spend all this time running around trying to confirm that this person said that, this person said that. So, firsthand testimony is the only one they really take seriously. And the main reason for this is it opens up the station to legal liability. So, the name of the game for journalists is not getting sued. That's like one of the highest priorities. You can put out a bad story, you can just completely bomb it. No one watched your story, like everything is just terrible. But at the end of the day, if you didn't get sued, that it's a good day. So just keep that in mind when working with journalists, is that defamation, things like that, especially in our field of work when it comes to people on the opposite end of animal welfare. That is not something that journalists are going to want to deal with. So, attributions, this is expressed through journalists always having to say stuff like according to, or the report states, video shows, or she says that, parentheses, in first person. So everything always has to be attributed. This is one of the most important things as a journalist. You, as a journalist, are not actually saying anything, you're just relaying the information to a bigger audience. So everything always has to be attributed. And then moving on, how much reach does news actually get? So this is a little bit of a behind the scenes here. The market that I worked for had approximately 650,000 people as far as the viewership goes. And if you got 10,000 clicks on your website, that was considered a top story of the week. Like, you did fantastic if one of your stories got 10,000 views. So this is a screenshot that I pulled today of this metrics that I still have access to. And you can see the top performing story over the month was 15,000 views. So, coming from a social media perspective, 15,000 views, that's a decent viewership for like a reel or a post. But in the news world, 15,000 clicks on your website, that's great. You did a fantastic job. But yeah, most stories, they stay sub 2,000 sub 2,000 clicks. So that's important to know. And one of the main competitors of of news stations is social media. So, journalists are competing with Facebook, they're competing with Instagram, TikTok. I can't tell you the amount of times I've shown up and I've tried to put together a story, and everybody that I'm talking to already knows everything about everything because they saw it on Facebook, right? So I'm like trying to get the story out, like, hey, like this is going on. What are your thoughts on this? And everyone's already informed because of Facebook. So yeah, competing with social media is very difficult. Um, but revenue is only generated through website clicks, the app. Some stations have like their own app, and TV ads. So keep that in mind. If it's like a reel, the station doesn't really make a lot of money off of that. So they're not as incentivized. Um, and most people, they don't necessarily just click on the story. They don't want to navigate through all of the website advertisements, things like that. They just read the headline and they move on, or they read the comments section. So that's important to know too, is think about what the headline is going to be for the story that you're pitching. So I do say that, they don't get a lot of reach, but that doesn't mean that stations don't have a lot of reach themselves, because people do watch a lot of these. So one thing that I pushed for is turning packages into reels at my station. And I remember when I brought this idea to my two supervisors at the time, one of them asks me, well, what do you think? Should we do that? And I was like, well, I don't know, because we would basically be giving out um, our packages for free, we wouldn't be getting paid for them. And then he goes, well, there's your answer. And I was like, oh, okay. But then the other supervisor was like, how about you do it? He's like, go ahead and do it. Let's see you turn them into reels. So I did it, and I started doing it, and it picked up a ton of traction. So this is just one of the last ones that I put together from my Facebook. So you can see nearly 400 views, 400,000 views on this one, and about the same amount on TikTok as well. This is from Facebook. 100,000 views on this one, 90,000 views on this one. So people do watch them. However, there's low incentive for stations to post them because they want to drive traffic to their website, because that's how they make money. But the number of comments is the top metric that stations are really looking for. So if you see a story and there's a lot of comments on it, there's a lot of engagement, that's shows what a successful story is. So I do think that there's a lot of hope for the animal movement when it comes to getting more coverage because of our efforts in Portland currently. I looked through some of the coverage that we've gotten, and we received hundreds of comments, over 1,000 likes and shares on some posts that the news put out. So there's a lot of engagement there, and engagement is money for these stations. And yeah. And with that, I think I can hand it off to Natalie.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah, that was super informative. I've been on the news and all this stuff and spoken with journalists, but I definitely don't know that whole hierarchy. So that was really interesting to learn. And yeah, I just want to talk about kind of my experience going on the news, on radio debates, and everything like that. And yes, getting coverage for animals is difficult, but if you do like ballot initiatives or any sort of legislative stuff, that is a great way to get a lot of coverage. So, pretty much all of my experience with this is because of our ballot initiative campaigns in Denver in 2024. And they were both pretty controversial. You wouldn't think that a fur ban would be that controversial, but it was. I think just like you said, Anvar, anything to do with animals is going to be controversial. So, as far as how to prepare to actually go on TV or to go on the radio, it can seem very intimidating. And I definitely always still get nervous beforehand, but there's a lot you can do to prepare. So the biggest thing would be to just practice with your friends and family. So chances are, if you are watching this, you've spent a lot of time talking about animal rights. And, most people probably don't want to listen to you, but sometimes you can get people to listen to you, and that is a great time to practice. That is another reason I think street outreach is great. I'm not sure if street outreach is super effective for turning people vegan. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. We don't have great data on that, but it is absolutely effective for increasing your communication skills and increasing your ability to speak well for animals and become persuasive and body language and everything like that. So if you're currently not doing any sort of street outreach, but you do want to, speak up for animals on a bigger stage one day, then I highly recommend prioritizing that. And then another thing you can do, this is a picture of me just writing out notes. I think that was a day I found out that I had like an hour to prep for going on the news. And yeah, I was just writing out different points. You basically know what they're going to ask you. You can have different talking points, and we'll cover later kind of what your main talking points should be. But it's really important to write things out and record yourself, or at least speak out loud, because sometimes I'll write something out and I'll be like, oh, that's going to sound great. And then I just like can't say it for whatever reason. It sounds weird. So definitely practice speaking out loud. And then one thing to do that really helps kind of calm your nerves, get you in a better mood, is to, 30 minutes before you're about to go on, stop doing any prep, just relax and watch something that always makes you laugh. That could be stand up comedy, funny YouTube videos, just whatever is going to make you feel good, and try to watch that right before you go on. That'll put you in a better mindset, and you'll come across, more nice and good and stuff to the audience. Um, so yeah, that is generally how to prepare, and I'm ready for the next slide. Awesome. Yeah. So what to wear? This is super important, especially because, it's generally the older demographics that are going to be watching the news. And I think they do care more if people look clean and professional. So, I know we all kind of, animal activists aren't the best at dressing normally. We kind of like to break norms of society, but when you're going on the news, just try to look as normal as you can. And there's actually something called the three-piece rule, which I learned from PETA. I didn't realize it's like an actual kind of fashion term. But basically, when you're going to appear on camera, you want three pieces of clothing or accessories. So I literally always wear this outfit. I just have a blazer, button down shirt, and then a necklace. I'd probably wear like a more professional looking necklace if I were going on today, but that's three pieces, right? So for whatever reason, that just looks better on camera. It kind of completes your outfit. So if you're a woman or non-binary, you kind of have a bit more freedom than men would have. You can do earrings, necklace, and headscarves, things like that. For men, generally just like a suit with a tie. That's a good way to follow the three-piece rule. And try to make sure you wear something that you're comfortable in. If it feels really weird, then it's going to make you feel weird and you just won't be as confident. So whenever I know I'm going to be going on the press a lot, I like to just buy one outfit and just wear it all the time. So just have something ready to go in your closet so you can just get the notice that you have to go and you don't have to think too much about what to wear. All right, next slide. Okay, so visual elements are so important. This is make or break when it comes to appearing on the news. And I chose this picture. This is from an animal rebellion. Animal Rising used to be called Animal Rebellion. And what they had done is they had shut down 4 McDonald's distribution centers and actually like shut down McDonald's all across the UK, which is wild. So that was a really cool action. But then the press they got around it was even more impressive. It made worldwide news, literally all over the world. And the reason for that is because of these cool visual elements that they had. So everyone is familiar with McDonald's, Ronald McDonald. So they have him like, saying he's sorry. And then the golden arches with the fake blood, I just think is so cool because we all know that animal farming is incredibly violent and horrible, and society always ignores that. But if you have that bloody element, it's a great way to just get that point across. And it makes stations so much more likely to cover if you have things like this. And I know Cassie in the other live stream that AAC just did talked about like they had a giant Elon Musk head at one point. So for whatever reason, the press likes stuff that's really big. So if you're doing a protest and you want to get press for it, if it's foie gras, maybe make a giant duck, and then it's going to really increase the likelihood that your story is going to get picked up. All right, next slide. So this is kind of how we learned this lesson in Denver. And basically, they had done a story on our fur ban. And there was this woman on the left, Colleen Orr. I call her the crying hat clown because, she's a total hat clown. And she makes hats with beaver fur, so beaver felt. So these hats would have been banned if the fur ban passed. And they were like $500 per hat, sometimes $1,000 per hat. And we had both been interviewed for the story. And the story spent about a minute and a half just showing her hat shop and having her talk about why she didn't want this measure to pass. And then I'm on the right there, and it only showed me for like 20 seconds. They didn't mention anything I said about the animals, and we just thought they must have hated us or had a vendetta against animal activists. But later we learned that the reason was because she was in this hat shop. It showed her making hats, very visually engaging, whereas I'm just literally standing on the street. Like there's nothing interesting about that shot right now. So that's why she got more airtime. It wasn't because they hated us. It was just that she had the visual element going on. All right, next slide. So we took that lesson, we learned it, and we thought, okay, what is a place that we can have a visually engaging story and we know that they're going to have to talk about the animals? So this is actually a rabbit sanctuary outside Denver. And, since some of the hats were made with rabbit fur, we just had the journalists meet us there. And then they got a ton of footage of really cute bunnies. And then in that picture on the right, I'm like holding a bunny. They made me wear Crocs, the yellow Crocs. I wouldn't have chosen to wear those on the news. That was a super last minute day as well. But because we were in that location, not only did we like double the amount of airtime that we got, but they also really focused on the animals. And that actually, they had Colleen Orr in that story again, the hat lady, and she's like crying about her hats, like, why would anyone do this? And then it like cuts to the bunnies, and it's like, oh, this is why people are doing this, right? It's because it's about the animals, and that actually matters. So having it at that sanctuary just made it so they couldn't ignore our main message. All right, next slide. Great. So sometimes they are going to insist on Zoom, and then you may think, oh no, I can't do anything cool visually. Like, how am I going to go to a sanctuary? It's going to be on Zoom. And in the left, I am just sitting in the living room. It's like a really ugly shot. There's like a parrot cage and a fridge, and the lighting's bad. So they really didn't use much of what I said because it looked so bad. Now, if you look on the right, I had actually taken the Zoom call from a different sanctuary. So it's great because the animals are there. They were eating hay. And yeah, if you want to get animals in the shot, definitely put some hay down, because it's hard to get them to not move around. But if they're just eating, then they're going to be happy. So that's such a much more engaging shot. And once again, you know, even if I didn't have a chance to mention the animals, they still would have been in it. So people are still getting that animal rights message when they wouldn't if I'm just over Zoom in my living room. Next slide. Awesome. Great. So now we talked about the visual element, and I want to talk about message discipline. And when we do have an opportunity to speak about animal rights, I think there's kind of a tendency to be like, oh, I'm going to talk about climate change and the environment and, like, you know, whatever else, the harm to slaughterhouse workers and things like that. Um, but in our polling, we found that by far the most persuasive messaging was just about the animals. So Zoran Mamdani, I don't know if everyone watching this saw much of his campaign, but I thought he did such a great job with message discipline. Every question someone asked him, he would tie it back to the cost of living crisis and affordability. And I mean, at this point, it seems like everyone in the country knows that, like, he wanted free buses, free childcare, and like freezing the rent, right? Like, why would I know that? I don't live in New York City. But because he kept repeating those things over and over, and they all come back to affordability, that allowed him to do well in that campaign. Because when people thought of him, they thought of, oh, wow, you know, life is really expensive. I don't want to pay this much. I'm going to vote for him. So, yeah, there was one clip where someone had tried to kind of drag him into talking about Israel, Palestine. And instead of doing that, he just said, I'm going to keep my focus on New York City and the cost of living crisis. So that's another thing, is like, when journalists ask you a question, you don't have to answer the question that they asked you. You can answer something completely differently. They may not use it, but keep it focused on the animals, because really no one wants to talk about animals in our world. Like, they just don't want to think about it. So if there's a way they can put you in their segment without talking about the animals, they are going to do that. So whatever question you get asked, just bring it back to animals. So yeah, for like a quick example of how that could look in practice, like if someone asked me, oh, well, what's the hardest thing about running a ballot initiative campaign in Denver? I could say something. I mean, the real answer would be like, oh, the hardest thing is, you know, getting volunteers together and mobilizing people and keeping people excited and the momentum high. But that may be a true answer, but that's not the best answer for moving animal rights forward. Instead, I could say something like, you know, the hardest thing about this campaign is that people don't know how horrible foie gras is for the animals. They're literally force fed until their livers swell up to 10 times their natural size. So with that answer, you're still, you know, talking about something difficult in the campaign, but you're getting that animal rights message in there. So that would be something you could do there. All right, next slide. Great. So throughout all of this, the journalists are going to act like they're your best friend. Like they're going to be everything you say, they're going to be like, oh my God, like that's so great. Like, wow, all this stuff. They're basically trying to get you to say something. I mean, maybe they're not all trying to do this, but a lot of them are trying to get you to say something stupid so that they can kind of like twist your words or say something like off the record. Like I remember in Denver at one point, a journalist came to one of our campaign parties and a bunch of activists were just talking to him like they didn't really realize that it was going to end up in the news. And he got a quote, just kind of like a quote that made one of the activists look bad, that she just kind of said without thinking. So that's the type of thing that a lot of them are going to try to do because that increases the controversy of the story. So a good rule of thumb is to just say less than necessary. So if they ask you an open-ended question, just give a short answer. I know like 8 to 12-second sound bites if you're on TV, and if you're doing like phone or radio, you do have a bit more leeway with that. But remember that these people are not your friend. That's why I put Pierce Morgan in this, because, you know, just imagine that every journalist you're talking to is like Pierce Morgan. He's not your friend. He probably doesn't care about animals. Maybe some of them do care about animals, but even if they do, other people in the station might not. So there's a good chance it won't even make it into the final cut. So just keep really focused, keep on your message of talking about the animals, and you're going to do a lot better. And yeah, I think that's all I had for my presentation. So yeah, we're definitely happy to answer questions now.
Woo, that was great. Really great, both of you. I guess you can stop sharing the screen. Okay, great. Yeah, that was so good. You covered so much. I have some questions, but they might be repetitive. But we are open now for questions from folks who are also watching us live. So go ahead. It's time to put your questions in the comment section, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. But I was thinking when you were just talking, Natalie and Anvar, does a journalist have to tell you that you're on the record? I mean, do they even use that term? You see that in TV shows all the time. Are we on the record? Are we off the record? Are they obligated to tell you or not? And then it's okay if you're not to use it, no matter what.
Yeah, you're pretty much, when speaking to a journalist, you're pretty much always on the record when speaking to journalists. There are, if you have like a really close relationship, a very trusting relationship, like sometimes law enforcement would tell us things off the record, so we can kind of start putting things together. So that does happen, and people do. Our station did honor that. Those are very serious relationships that you have with these organizations, so you don't want to necessarily ruin that. But when it comes to things like nonprofits or activism collectives, then I'm not sure that they would honor that. Like there's not necessarily an incentive for them to honor something being off the record. But yeah, unless you're in a one party consent state, you should always assume that it's going to get aired, it's going to get recorded. And always remember to take your mic off too, because photographers are probably listening. If you have it on, they can hear it directly going into the camera. So
oh my God, this is the world we live in. Yes, there are eyes everywhere, there are cameras everywhere. You have to assume they're hiding in every corner or not hiding in plain sight. But the takeaway from that is to always assume that you're on the record. And you don't always know if someone's a reporter. I guess they won't always identify themselves, but I don't know who you're talking to. And so I think you might have covered this, Anvar, but what's recommended in terms of, again, how much lead time between the event and contacting the news media? I guess as close together as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so typically the way we have our strategy is we try to do things ahead of time. Because with journalists, a good rule of thumb is to have a story planned out for the week, like your story's planned out for the week. So I know what I'm going to be doing Monday. I know what I'm going to be doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's the journalist's perfect world. So a week in advance, a week and a half in advance would work. Sometimes journalists are desperate to find a story, especially in smaller markets where there's not as much stuff going on the weekends, when government offices are closed and things like that. That's, you're more likely to have journalists pick up a story, although there are less journalists to cover stories and less shows on the weekends. During holidays, usually stories aren't as serious, and it's a little bit easier to get airtime just because there's so many offices and places that are closed.
Okay, got it. Okay, good. So a week to 10 days generally. Yeah. Okay, great. And we're open for questions. So if folks are watching us live, we welcome your questions now. But Natalie, so you were saying that you during the Pro Animal Futures Denver 2024 campaign ballot initiatives, you appeared on dozens of TV and radio interviews about the initiative, like back to back, right? So I know you said a little bit about what that was like for you, but can you expand a little bit more, like, because I'm putting myself in your position and going, I guess did it get easier? Did you get revved up? Did you like hit your sweet spot at some point right in the middle, or was it really tiring? Did you feel like you were burning out? Like, what was that like? That's unusual position.
Yeah,
Back to
it's
back,
definitely,
dozens.
yeah, it's an unusual position just because, elections are so time bound, right? So all of this was going on like mid-September to mid-October before the election. People were kind of interested in picking it up before that a little bit, but really that was the bulk of everything. And honestly, I didn't feel burnt out at all. I love talking about animal rights, like that is my favorite thing to talk about. I love representing the animals. I really believed in our initiatives. I wanted to, people were just throwing out the craziest arguments that were not based in reality. Like I wanted to be there to correct some of that stuff. But yeah, one thing I didn't mention during my presentation was that the best ones I did were the ones that were live. And the reason for that is that you can say anything and it's gonna go, right? So like I did 2 live radio shows, and like the first one, this guy who had me on, like he thought I was a complete joke. Like he thought that I was going to do terribly. I think he was friends with the owner of the slaughterhouse that we were trying to shut down and the city council guy that was like super against us. They were all buddies. So he has me on, and then I did pretty well. Like I held my own in that debate. Like, I'd been debating people on animal rights for years. And then afterward, it seemed like we were really good friends. We were like joking and whatever. I had brought donuts and he walked me around and like gave donuts out. And then as soon as I got home, he started sending me these really mean emails. So like I think that the slaughterhouse owner and maybe the city council person had heard that interview, and since they couldn't edit out any of the true stuff I was saying about how bad the slaughterhouse was, that wasn't the narrative they were trying to have put out. So if you can get something live, that is the best thing, because then these really intense pro animal messages that really talk about the violence the animals are experiencing, those are going to have to make it into the final cut, whereas they might not originally. But yeah, it was definitely a little stressful. Like I would just wake up and be like, oh, I guess I'm going out to the news again. I bought so many donuts. Like that's another thing. You don't want to show up empty handed. So, I spent a lot of money on donuts that month. But I think it was worth it.
Did you tell them they were vegan donuts, or did you just not tell them?
I put like pro animal stickers and like shut down the slaughterhouse on the box, and just hoped that they would know that I wouldn't bring non-vegan donuts.
No. Hello, not a hypocrite today. No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, interesting. I give you, quite a lot of kudos for surviving almost all of those interviews. And now you're a rugged expert in this, and you can tell the story and get better each time for the animals. And it really shows us how we want everybody as much as possible to come out of your comfort zone, and don't say you can't do it. Try it. And you might mess up, and then you learn from that. But, right? That's what practice is really.
Yeah, you're definitely going to mess up. I mean, every time you're going to be like, oh, I wish I had said that differently or this differently or whatever. But I mean, they're not going to use most of what you say. Like, it's just going to be very small clips of whatever you're saying. So you can't mess up that much. Like, if you stumble over your words, they're probably not going to use that clip anyway. So at least, if you show up with a positive attitude and you kind of know what you're going to be talking about, and appear confident, even if you're not, then it's probably going to go pretty well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we do have one question in the comment section. Anvar, do you have any experience with op-eds?
Yeah, so op-eds is currently what we're working on now in our Portland campaign. We're trying to get as many people to send in op-eds regarding our foie gras initiative that are from Portland or in Portland. As far as advice goes, my biggest recommendation for the op-eds would be to make it a little bit more personal, develop yourself as a character in the op-ed. Be sure to tell a story of not just the topic that you're covering, but kind of who you are as a person and why this topic matters to you, because that's kind of, I think, the biggest piece of the op-eds as to, why is your opinion important. So establishing a little bit of credibility, establishing a little bit of your character and putting a piece of yourself into that writing, I think would be my best advice.
Great. Yeah, that's a great tip. And Anvar, I was going to ask you as well, do news media outlets keep close tabs on social media? Like, is there somebody whose role it is to do that, like to see what's trending and grab stories from there? Or is it a cause and is it a both working both ways relationship with social media? Even though I know you said it's your competition. It's the mainstream media's competition is social media.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're the main competition, but in my experience, I was expected to show up every single day with 2 stories ready to go. Like they're checked and I'm ready to pitch them. And that required a lot of preparation outside of work hours. And a lot of the stories I would pull from social media. Yeah. So I was part of pretty much all the local Facebook groups. I was constantly on social media. I had all of the organizations followed, like local nonprofits, local law enforcement, government agencies, pretty much anywhere I could pull a story from. I would on the internet. So I would dig very deep. But yeah, Facebook was the primary location.
Yeah, you see a lot of crossover, of course. All right, good to know. So we're open again for questions or comments. And Natalie, I know you talked a little bit about some great tips for being on camera, which I was going to ask you about anyway. So the opposite of that might be, what would you tell people never to do on camera, or anything that you regret? Anything, any no-nos?
Oh, I've got plenty. So yeah, one thing just for anyone who maybe doesn't feel comfortable on camera would be that you can start practicing now. Like I've become so much better on camera just from recording videos and then editing them and seeing, wow, I say or like. That was my big filler word that I really had to cut out, was like. So anytime you can record yourself and see kind of your verbal tics, like anything like that. I actually joined Toastmasters, and when you're speaking at Toastmasters, they count your filler words, and then afterward they say, oh, you had 8 filler words. So that's a really good way. Just awareness is the first step, and then in addition to those verbal tics, you may have physical ones. And this is always my biggest mistake when I'm on camera, is I kind of like to hit whatever surface is in front of me to like emphasize points. And usually the microphone is on the table, so there'd be all these thumps and they'd say, oh, you have to stop hitting that, because if you're doing stuff like that, then the audio is going to be bad and they're not going to use bad audio, so you're really hurting yourself. So just anything that makes you look nervous, like whether you're rocking back and forth or just like kind of frantically moving, hitting things. Yeah, I'm sure there's any number of things you could do there, but I would say that that is the biggest thing. And then, yeah, I don't know. Just kind of be mindful of where you're looking and how you're standing up straight with open body language, smiling a little bit, unless you're talking about something really sad. Being expressive with your face is good. Just kind of being aware of how you look and how you come across. And I think that that's something that comes with experience. Most people who start even making videos, they hate the sound of their voice because it sounds different in your head. So just getting used to things like that is a good first step.
Again, practice, practice, practice. Record yourself, watch it back. Don't be hypercritical of yourself or judgmental, but just use it as an opportunity to, to improve, which we all can. And I always see those newscasters on the news, and I'm so impressed that they can read with just out moving a muscle, and just practice reading out loud that way, and like they're robots. No, I'm just kidding. But really a little bit sort of that way. So we do have, I guess, this question from our comment section from Ray could be for either of you. Should you always pitch to local outlets, even if your campaign impacts more than the local community?
I can answer this one. Yeah, absolutely. So the reason for that is because, like I mentioned earlier, that within a corporation, the media is often shared. So the stories that I would put out in Southwest Florida were often aired as far as Monterey County in California. So like across the entire country. Shared through various different outlets. Sometimes like they'll show up here, sometimes they'll show up here. So basically these local news stories, they go into a big database where other producers putting together shows, they can pull an entire package just from your local news station to show in their market. So yeah, I think the local news is definitely a way into a national market, basically. And sometimes even the national outlets pick up the stories as well, if it's compelling enough.
Okay, great answer. All right, so here's a question, maybe Natalie, I'm not sure, good answer, or Anvar. Are there any cool media ideas planned for the DC or Denver campaigns? And how can we get involved?
Yeah, well, as far as media ideas planned, we do have some coming up. In DC, we're going to be having a launch party for the campaign to start gathering signatures, which we've had a couple delays. So we're really eager to start. And we're actually hosting a 1.5 month long convergence, which coincides with the AAC convergence in DC. So I think a really smart idea would be to come to both of them. So that would be in May. Ours actually goes April 13th to the end of May. And then AAC's, I believe, is May 14th through 17th, something like that.
Through the 17th, okay. I think.
Yeah, so I think that would be amazing. If anyone really wants to get involved, then coming to DC. But say you only want to do something remotely, we also have a social media working group, which not tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to be having a meeting where we learn how to use Reddit specifically to, change the public narrative, because a lot of voters do look to Reddit to see how they should think about issues, and we can actually influence that. We can get in the comments. So we're going to be talking about that Thursday. But yeah, for the media, I think it's going to be, that's the really cool thing about ballot initiatives, is that people want to cover them because elections are exciting. And it's rare that you see animal rights stuff on the ballot. So I'm sure a lot of people were aware of the Measure J campaign with the factory farm ban in Sonoma County. That got way more press than we ever did. So, start your own ballot campaigns if you want. We've got podcasts about how to do that. But even just basic stuff, we can all get better.
And where can people find out about the convergence? What's your website again for Pro Animal Future? I'm going to give that. We'll put that in the comment section.
For sure. So the convergence is proanimal.org/GOOSA, GOOSA. And yeah, proanimal.org. If you're in DC, proanimaldc.org. Yeah, very, very exciting time.
I mean, maybe we could talk even a little bit more about Pro Animal Future now for those who are a little bit unfamiliar. I know you have talked about it as an organization, as part of this movement, as campaign organizers, what your mission and purpose and what's next and the calls to action. So maybe you could both comment that on those. What's up with Pro Animal Future?
Yeah, I can start if that's okay. So with Pro Animal Future, our main idea is that we get political for animals. So what that constitutes is lobbying, initiatives through signature gathering, and things of that nature. You know, we contact our local city council, we build relationships with them, we empower our community, our volunteers to work together to collect signatures, truly step out and show what our community can do and how much we really care about animals.
Yeah, and I can touch on kind of what's, really coming up for us, which is that we already got a foie gras ban on the ballot in Denver. So people are going to vote yes or no if they want to still allow foie gras, force-fed foie gras specifically, to be sold in Denver, and that would end the production as well. Not that there are any foie gras farms in Denver, but if someone wanted to start one, then they couldn't. And that's already on the ballot. And then DC, we're starting with the basically the same initiative, force feeding, and yeah, we have 3 months to get like 25,000 signatures, or I think we're shooting for 40,000 because a lot of them won't be valid. So it's definitely going to be a big push. But our polling on these measures is really good. So we're hoping that they'll pass. The last campaigns we ran, we were just kind of trying to figure out, how far are the boundaries? Like, can we get people to ban slaughterhouses? Turns out we can't do that quite yet. But hopefully they will say force feeding animals is wrong. And then it won't be allowed anymore in DC, Denver, and then Portland. We're doing the kind of the lobbying strategy. So it's a little bit different, but that should be in the next month or two as well. So ideally, there won't be foie gras in 3 cities by the end of this year.
Just a few small goals, nothing big. Oh my gosh. And yeah, like you said, the main challenge is getting enough people, getting a critical mass of people, showing how people show up by the hundreds would be amazing and really mobilizing. So folks, please get involved with these existing campaigns that, we have good chances of being successful. And so if you did participate in 2024's, Pro Animal Future campaign ballot initiatives, please comment that in the comment section. We'd love to hear what a great experience. I was really sorry I didn't make it out there to help out, and we'll try to do so since it's going to be a little closer to where I am this year. But so we have a little bit of time. We want to wrap up in a little bit, but we can certainly take a couple more questions or comments. Anvar, I was going to ask you though, maybe this is a little bit off topic, but maybe not. Do you recommend journalism as a career choice for folks who are interested in animals, or in general? Is it a growing field or not a growing field? What have been your experiences working for the press professionally?
Well, it's definitely a shrinking field, I would say. The news station that I worked at actually got sold right before I moved back to Colorado. It was sold for $40 million, I believe. And yeah, when I was working initially as a photojournalist, approximately 60-70% of the staff got laid off in the newsroom, and they went to like a completely different system. And I was one of the 60% that got laid off. And I had to reapply for a multimedia journalist position, which I was lucky enough to get. But there were other employees that had to find other career paths as well. I do love journalism a lot, and I think that there is a path for it, but I think it's more so as independent journalism rather than like corporate owned. I feel like social media has such a big reach for just an everyday person that we don't necessarily rely on traditional media as much, which is corporate owned. So when a corporate owned media tends to be a lot more controlled versus media that's just put out by people.
All right, excellent. Yeah, here we are. We're going to try to remember a world before social media. It's now impossible to even remember that, but I do. I'm old enough to remember pre-social media era. But So someone in the comment section, Natalie, you answered it here, but you can take that. I'd love to help out in DC, but not sure if I can come for more than a weekend or two. Is it still worth signing up for GUSA if I can't come for a longer period of time? And GUSA is an acronym, I assume, right?
GUSA stands for Goosapalooza. So
okay.
not really an acronym, just a abbreviation.
Okay, that's clever.
Goosapalooza. Yeah, so you can definitely come for a little bit, a few days, however long you can swing. And then also, if anyone does have a remote job, you can do your remote job from the house. Like, we basically provide food, housing, and camaraderie, and then the rest is up to you. So basically, you only have to pay for your flight to get there. And then if you can only come for a weekend, you're still absolutely welcome, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and that will also be, you can find that in AAC's link tree, and on our website there is some housing, I imagine, still available since it's a little further down the line.
Yeah, and if there's not, we're just going to get more.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, so besides bringing donuts, what are some other ways, maybe, Anvar and Natalie, to build relationships, close relationships with the press, to build a rapport with the press?
Anvar, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this was something I was going to include in my slides as well, is building relationships with journalists. And the primary thing that I would recommend is following them on social media, keeping up with some of the stories that they're putting out. It really goes a long way when you show up to a story as a journalist and someone mentions a story that they really liked or that really impacted them or that they really enjoyed. So, really watching the news from time to time, occasionally, I think goes a very, very long way. There's also a press event that I'm going to this afternoon. So we have what's called a Denver Press Club here in Colorado, and it's a convergence of journalists where you can just go out and you can meet them. You can meet editors in chief. Today, it's a political newspaper that's hosting a presentation there. So I'm hoping to build some connections there. So yeah, press events are a great way to meet them.
All right, try to be on a first name basis. Anything to add to that, Natalie, or you're just going to say just bring donuts?
So I can say what I did. I don't know if it's like the most effective thing, but yeah, I would bring donuts, and that was really more for like kind of the people who work there, not necessarily just the journalist. And then always follow up after, like, wow, like that story was so great. Because usually they're gonna have texted you or called you at some point, so you're gonna have their phone number. And then next time something significant is happening, you can just, I don't know if you should text them. They might get annoyed, but I certainly did. And then Instagram as well. Getting in people's DMs is always smart.
Nice. Excellent. So maybe for a final question or two, we're open for maybe one more from our comment section, would be, as Anvar, as you said, that a journalist, according to their ethical credo, is supposed to be unbiased. But do either of you have something come to mind when there was clearly a bias? Give us an example of that when it came through in the outcome, in the story, when the story came out, or even during the process of talking to the press. Or do you have a great example of really a time when something was really effective, when the journalism was really great, really unbiased, or maybe biased towards us, towards the animals? No, that never happens. I was going to say when pigs fly, but I don't know if that might be a species term. So Anvar and then Natalie.
Yeah, so when it comes to journalistic bias, I think it's safe to accept the fact that every journalist does come with a bias. It's just a matter of trying to minimize it as much as possible. oftentimes it'll stem from the kind of experience that they had with the person that they're interviewing. So, you know, keep in mind, you asked earlier if journalism was a good profession. Some of the colleagues at different stations that I was working with, you know, were making like under $40,000 a year. So it's a pretty demanding job, you know, that requires typically a 4-year education, that doesn't really pay a lot. So it's not necessarily that people are getting into it for the money. Um, so, you know, when they show up, they're often overworked, they're often tired. So when you make it really easy for them and you make it a good experience, like, hey, here's a great location with a great backdrop for you. Here's all of this footage and like all of these people that you can talk to. When you make it really easy for them, that typically tends to swing whatever bias they have more positively for you. So even if they don't necessarily agree on the same sort of perspective, or if they themselves personally don't agree with you, if you make it like a fun, pleasant experience for them, that could definitely sway the way they put together the story.
Okay, Natalie, anything?
Yeah, definitely. I think that from my experience, they actually do really try to be unbiased. Like, it seems like really if a story is skewed a certain way, it's because of the visuals or because of something else. Like, it doesn't seem like they have malicious intent. One particularly good one that I remember from Denver was from Rocky Mountain PBS, and they basically spent all day with me. Like, I met them in the morning, they filmed an interview. One thing I did that I think they like is, like, I think people are always aware that animal rights activists or vegans in general, like, think that they're better than you or something. So I try to be like extra, like, try to make myself seem not morally superior from like the get-go. Like, I'll do self-deprecating humor or things like that. I think it kind of brings their guard down so that they can just relate to you and like see that you're not some crazy animal activist. You're just a normal person who also really cares about animals. And having a lot of things planned, like we had the interview and then we went out, we talked to people in the park, and then there was a pro animal future social. So there were just like a lot of different events so they could get a lot of different types of footage. But then they also interviewed sheep farmers, out further in the state that are like, oh, these activists are terrible. They're going to destroy my livelihood. But I felt that they presented it in a pretty balanced way. And yeah, I think that they really are trying their best to be unbiased.
Okay. So any journalists that are listening out there, we know you guys are trying to be unbiased, but help us out. No, I'm just kidding. But whoever came up with the idea to record at the bunny sanctuary and then the farm animal sanctuary, right? We were talking about sanctuaries before we came on. I think that was such a creative. How can it not speak to someone's heart, open someone's heart? The animals themselves speak for themselves in that way when they're happy and thriving, and you see that, it speaks volumes, certainly. So
Yeah.
that's always a great place to go.
Yeah, and it's kind of unfortunate because the meat industry, they have animals that they can just showcase, like these happy farms, which obviously we know aren't happy. So if we can also have animals like, hey, they're not used for profit at all, I think you're right. It does speak volumes.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap up, but I'm going to throw it back to each of you just one more time to end on some final word or a hopeful message for activists, a message for the next generation of activists, or really anything that you would like to leave us with. So maybe Anvar and then Natalie.
Absolutely. Well, here at Pro Animal Future, me personally, I'm very, very hopeful for the future. I see the movement getting so much momentum, and um, more and more people are on board with caring about animals, finding out what's happening behind closed doors. More and more plant-based restaurants are opening up in our communities, and it's a sign for what's to come. More and more plant-based products are appearing on shelves, and I love it. And I'm really excited for the future, and I can't imagine this trajectory really going any other way. So keep up the good work to everyone that does whatever they can to help animals, but even the tiniest little decisions mean the world to them. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I also feel pretty hopeful about the future. It does feel like more and more people are speaking about animal farming and kind of the catastrophe that it is. Sorry, did I lose you guys?
No, you're still there.
Okay, my screen just went black. But yeah, so anyone watching this, I would encourage you to come to Convergence, whether that's with AAC or Goosapalooza, because, you know, I came to my first AAC Convergence in 2023, and really going to that was the first time I'd been around. But that's where I met you, Michelle. And the first time I'd been around a bunch of people who really cared about animals, and it can just be so transformative because if you're at home alone, maybe you're the only vegan, you don't know anyone, it can feel very, very isolating. So I would encourage everyone to do whatever they can to find a community that also cares about animals because that's what's gonna keep you going long term.
Thank you for mentioning that and sort of ending on that note. You're right. We are an amazing community. I mean, some of the best folks in the world, and so supportive to be around, and so inspiring, and so encouraging. And all the people that I admire, when they're in one place at one time, it's just wonderfully overwhelming. And you're all there for basically the same purpose. So yeah, certainly join us. Don't be afraid to, because it's your first time or you feel like you don't have a lot of experience. It doesn't matter. This is where you come to get experience, and if you're new to activism, we take you under our wing. That's a good, pun there, not. So that, I mean, so thank you both very, very much for all the work that you're doing with Pro Animal Future and all that's coming in the future. And we'll definitely see you guys soon. So hang out for a bit as I wrap up. Thank you everybody for joining us. For as little as $2 a month, please support AAC through Patreon. So we can continue to provide free educational resources. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee, please apply through our website. Please hit subscribe here on our channel, smash that bell and give us a like, and then you'll be notified of upcoming lives. Please follow us on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. If you'd like to be added to our email list, please contact us through our website. And my final words are a silly vegan joke. How many carnivores does it take to change a light bulb? Guesses? You can put guesses. How many carnivores does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is none. They prefer to stay in the dark. Ha ha ha. Maybe funny, not funny. In all seriousness, though, please take this moment to renew your commitment to animal rights. The cruelty weighs heavily on all of us, but please don't feel defeated. Just keep fighting. If you're struggling with compassion fatigue, burnout, or worse, reach out to a fellow activist, because activist mental health is important to us. You are not alone. So until next time, this is AAC signing off.